Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is Kurt Miller, Senior Vice President, Strategy and Planning at George P. Johnson Experience Marketing. Kurt has been advertising copywriter at Oricom, creative director at Caribiner International, and Senior Vice President, Strategy and Creative at Jack Morton Worldwide. At GPJ, Kurt is the Chief Strategy and Experience Design Lead on the agency's largest account, IBM. Welcome here, Kurt.
Chuck, thank you very much, sir.
I'm curious to start. What is it you deal with? All these high tech companies like IBM, HP, Intel, Cisco. These are companies that are. I mean, they've got the best technology in the world. How does a design firm or an agency help them?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I always think of sort of derivative cultural products like the series Silicon Valley on HBO, and these folks are getting in front of their colleagues, whether they're gearheads or whether they're heads of business or venture capitalists, and they keep talking about how they're going to change the world works, or making the world a better place. And you think about that and think about how lofty and maybe even how stereotypical it sounds. But when you really kind of look at what they're trying to do, they are trying to change the very way that the world works through technology, and that's technology that appeals from a cultural standpoint, as well as how organizations operate in the world. And I think it's fascinating, and I think they think it's fascinating, but they occasionally and often need to turn it into terms that an everyday citizen of the world can think. And I think that's how an agency like GPJ or any of our colleagues in the industry now, above-the-line advertising agencies, Digital 2.0, event production companies that have become experiential marketing companies, we're all sort of converging on how to translate these lofty technologies and the goals these companies have until to how to make them understandable, how to tell stories, how to attract people with universal human thoughts that explain complex technologies. And I think it's exciting, and it's an honor to be able to do that kind of work. And I'm glad they keep coming back to us, frankly.
So when one of these companies comes up with this great technology and then you guys get involved and start to translate it, do they ever come back at the tech company and say, oh, I didn't think of it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's through a hook or an analogy. And a lot of times the folks who are maybe systems architects or have an engineering background have their own idea about what an analogy is. And frankly, a lot of times it is very approachable. And they do have to constantly get challenged into, tell me the way that your child would want to understand it, or tell me the way that an everyday person, one of your parents would understand who's not in this world. And but occasionally they kind of strike out on it, or they're so far into the decision tree block or the way that they would organize the engineering thought on it is that they can't come up with the analogy. So I think we have the ability to work on that from a universal human experience standpoint. And then we also have our own expertise in what it takes to instrument a journey from, depending on how people look at sales or marketing funnels, we look at it from an awareness to a consideration to a purchase. A lot of times it is about a purchase, whether it's buying into thinking or actually buying a product, service, or solution. And then how do you become an advocate for that? And we really do try to look at what does it take to bring either behavior or bottom line business impact through a product, service, solution, or aspiration that a company like this wants to come up with.
So do you guys usually get involved early on, or is it after they've created something, say, we're now ready to take this to market?
Yeah, I think it depends on the relationship. A lot of times we are seen as a widget sometimes. It's like, well, you guys do business-to-business conferences. So they're going to have everything kind of buttoned up, and they really just want to instrument a conference where they bring their target audiences in. And a lot of times, and frankly, you can imagine this would be more exciting, is they have a business problem and they need communications to solve it. So we step in and kind of look at an umbrella at the whole problem, think about and listen to the cues of what they want to achieve tactically. And then we consider those, as the input we're being given. But a lot of times we have the ability to think digital and physical working together, online and offline digital working together, which is exciting to do because a lot of times people are planning online campaigns and they don't think of the experiential or the hands-on kind of part of it. And then a lot of times they'll look at us and just say, we want you to fill an exhibit hall with some kit or we want you to put some people and some media on a stage. And a lot of times, even if that is the sort of end mechanism or the end tool, we will back up with them and say, in order to do what for whom. And that's the part where we build trust with our clients, with the stakeholders in a particular engagement or a desire to communicate something to an audience. And we really kind of roll up our sleeves together and start collaborating. And that sort of client agency relationship dissipates and it becomes a bunch of people in the same pool trying to solve something in common. And that's when it's the most satisfying. And we're actually lifelong business relationships form through projects that are more like that.
And what is experiential marketing today?
Yeah, I think experiential marketing, maybe it has its roots in something that used to be completely physical. And in my experience, it comes from a couple different areas. One is if you think about stagecraft, a lot of the companies that are now in experiential marketing, frankly, used to create Broadway shows for corporate, and they'd call them industrials, and they'd have film and live performance. And you think about Broadway shows for stages that want to launch a product or inspire a sales force. That was one side of it. Another side may have been through the creation of exhibits and environments in traditional trade shows. And those two sort of main buckets came together in the physical standpoint, but then take into the sort of modern era, the traditional advertising agency and all the things that it has done over the past 100+ years, digital agencies with the advent of the internet and online communication. And all three of those, the former physical only agency or production company, the traditional above the line ad agency, and add to that PR and traditional PR, and the digital agency, we've all kind of come together to converge over the same place. And it's really about how audiences want to experience a brand and want to come together in both a physical and a digital way. And I think the physical piece is what makes it so-called experiential versus not. But that physical piece can no longer be separated from the digital and from the interactive and multimedia approaches that folks in the digital space and even folks in film and video had created many, many years ago.
So do you glue that all together with advertising as well?
We do. I mean, our agency's remit is not as an agency of record for advertising, but a lot of times, and for example, a lot of my recent experience is with the IBM Corporation, and something that they did, it's just about 10 years ago now, they called it 11th Avenue after the address of the chocolate factory in New York where Ogilvy resides. And they brought Ogilvy, PR agencies of record, brand and design, and experiential with GPJ, and we got together on a regular basis and talked about an interdisciplinary approach to marketing and comms. And that sort of tradition proliferates among many different clients now, where they realize that all of these specialists need to sit at the table and work together to solve common problems. And there's enough pie in terms of revenue and service that everyone can be involved, and the best ideas rise to the top, and the collaborative decides on how to tackle them with the client's approval.
In an IBM or a company that large, are you generally dealing with is it the CMO driving it or the marketing department driving all this?
Yeah, it often does start at the CMO. I think IBM has, I don't know how unique the structure is, but I think a lot of the work that we do that is top down is split between the CMO, a lead for content, who is also the lead for advertising, who kind of specializes within that space, and then also the rise of the chief communications officer, and I think the rebirth of corporate social responsibility. So that combination of a CCO, a CMO, and then someone who helps to guide in between those with content and media creation that is channel agnostic.
But these are big global companies. I mean, how do you corral that?
Well, you do it in a few different ways. I mean, having a sound core strategy is one way to do it. And I think companies have done a really good job of consolidating the complexity of their business units. So, you'll have business units of the past, and maybe there would be a company like IBM would have over 10 of them. And they'd also have geo or market organizations that span across multiple regions. And I think what they've tried to do, for in the example of IBM, all publicly available, is that they have hero brands that they've tried to define in more human terms that reflect all the products, services, and solutions of all those offerings, simplified that, and done it off of a core value proposition that, frankly, is the digital transformation value prop, which is around cloud and artificial intelligence delivered over the cloud. And everything really does have to marshal into that more simplified point of view. And you sort of go and triage customer business problems or opportunities that you want to solve for in the marketplace. Start from that point of simplicity and do it from a truth will set you free kind of approach, where customer needs are met and uncovered one by one based on that simple core construct, and not on 25 sizes for 25 different business units that want to sell something to someone who's wondering even what the hell they're talking about, because they're hearing sellers come to them rather than hearing a single organization trying to solve their business problem.
Right. You mentioned AI. Where does the AI and cognitive fit in all of this these days?
Yeah, it fits everywhere. I think it really is about enrichment or augmenting core critical functions within organizations. And if you think about that as how business to business works, or how an organization works in sort of its core capabilities, and then also how those organizations talk to and better understand their end customers and end users. I think the reason why AI is finally coming of age is because bandwidth, computing power, connectivity through IoT are all finally coming of age, being interoperable, based on, for the large part, open systems and APIs that help disparate data sets talk to one another. And so instead of just having all these sort of multiple parallel processing kind of environments going on, or systems that are all operating, crunching large amounts of data, you're finally having them able to talk to one another. And then you're having the governance and policy that drives those capabilities, both from an industry standard and from the way even a single company can do all that within itself. And I think that ready for prime time aspect, I mean, it goes to everything. It's everything from the core functions of the corporation and how it talks with itself and to its customers, as well as the things that we kind of do over and over again, which is how to manage audiences, track them, understand their preferences, and serve them up a better marketing process and a better communications capability on a one-on-one basis, or even in aggregate.
So is AI today in big business going to be more behind the scenes, or is it going to be more customer facing, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, I think it shows up, it's kind of like that value prop thing I was talking about a couple minutes ago. What shows up as simple to a user, like a simple chatbot that they know how to use, and they use the same sort of interface when they're speaking to their friend or colleague or relation, that's the way it appears to the user. But then the complexity of what goes into it, both from a media-rich standpoint, drawing from multiple data sources, training and learning the back end based on more and more queries and responses and replies that come through that simple chat interface. That complexity is sort of masked behind the scenes, and it provides better results under the guise of that simple interface. And it also provides more media-rich and more choices for someone, even though they're just asking a simple question. And I think we have to look at it beyond the personal assistant, and then really kind of understand those multiple diverse data sources that are happening in the background, and then also the enriched capability to recognize data that is both visual and audio as well, which brings a whole new aspect into that exchange that happens between an end user and the multiple data inputs sitting behind the interface.
What's your take on the kind of approach of Google Duplex, which I'm sure you know, where a computer has a voice and calls a place to make a reservation, and the place they're calling can't tell it's a computer?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's only going to have to be improved by the restaurants or the businesses being able to sign up to services that have the capability of interfacing with those end user products. And, you've even seen the simplicity of whether you're using Yelp or OpenTable. I mean, giving those, for example, those sources who will build membership with restaurants, the capabilities that are built on one or a couple standard interface platforms, the ability of those services to then interface with the individual end users, it's getting that front end and the back end to actually be able to be built on the same standard. So it's not like saying it's all capable now, but because of that non-standardization on the front and back end, there tends to be a gap. And that's one of those ready for prime time things that through either membership, signing up, governance, and standardization, that will only improve over time, and those gaps will be eliminated.
So do you think something like a Google Duplex, which is converting voice, AI voice, basically, it'll stay that way, but it'll interface with a changing, say, restaurant dynamic technologically?
I believe so. And as the recognition of voice, like I forget what the source was, but I just read something this week, that it was in the huge Mary Meeker deck about the voice recognition of an AI or personal assistant AI versus human, that they finally have reached about the same level, around 95%. I only think that as that becomes improved, and then there's issues, I just think about the restaurant side, all the background noise that's going on, the fact that a person's name or a particular detail that's respective to a location or the name of a restaurant or whatever that is, that's probably the 5% that's not being recognized. So it's kind of interesting to see how we're going to work out that additional 5%, and then realize that in some cases, being able to use voice to text and text to speech in cooperation with simply thumbing in things that are really specific, like a person's name or whatever, that those conversations can take place at the same time. It doesn't have to be all voice or all chat or all text. That I think we're going to have to settle for that kind of blended information providing until it really does improve. And I think on some levels with pronunciation and interesting names, that some of it may never quite work unless you're also working with facial recognition and being able to lip read at the same time as your text. And
that's a lot.
Which is possible. I mean, it can be done. It's done through through personal assistants that are working through healthcare diagnostics. And I love the one avatar I was looking at a couple months ago, where someone was like, "Kurt, you look forlorn today." And I'm just like, oh my goodness, like, where's this going? Because it recognizes multi-point facial expressions in addition to being able to read the eyes. And also, you can put sensors on your fingers or in your pulse. It can read your heart rate. It can read moisture on the skin. And so that combination, if you're remote and not able to deal with a healthcare practitioner, it really is the next best thing. And it can also pick up those data patterns that individual interviews don't pick up, because it's just a human talking to a human.
Yeah, there's a lot of testing in that area going on big time right now. So you've got companies like a Domino's that can answer a phone, but it's really a computer answering a person. And you've got Google calling a person. It doesn't know it's a computer calling. Ultimately, does the voice in that stuff just go away?
Yeah, I'm interested to see. I'm kind of holding my opinion of where it's going to go, and it is in terms of who kind of gets somewhere first, gets it for a while, and it's like you go back to those old 80s discussions around Sony and NEC having the best technologies, and yet other industry standards won. I think we're going to see similar things here, although in the the post Moore's Law era, the race to adoption of some of these capabilities and technologies is going to be faster than ever. And the ability with a lot of companies that do have the goodwill of opening their APIs up to the marketplace, upstarts can get in faster than they may have in the past as well. And it'll be interesting to see how great ideas and being able to use those open technologies to put something out that then is interested in being bought and adopted, how that's going to work in a much different way than we did in those kind of Sony Betamax days of the past.
Right. These days, what's a data-driven approach, and what does that look like, and where do you see it going? 'Cause I know you're dealing
Uh,
with big data a lot.
yeah, I mean, there's so many different aspects within the technology landscape. I mean, everything, like I'll use from our event experiences capability just as an example. I mean, we're dealing with all the different places where media content might come from that we're trying to either generate in real time or trying to capture, make sense of from a data perspective, and then be able to use and leverage over time, that have a longer shelf life. We're looking at all of those sources. We're looking at things like social media networks and the monitoring and listening and publishing and amplifying of those, gaming platforms, mobile platforms, web platforms. Uh, even from our event management standpoint, we treat B2B events much the way that retail establishments treat their audiences in terms of being able to track, geofence, have beacon technology, bring offers to them, ask them what content is most relevant to them and serve them related content, serve them incentives about pricing based on what they're interested in to stop them from leaving the store. I mean, we're doing all these kinds of things in our physical, digitally integrated event space. And I think just kind of looking at that whole ecosystem, it's really daunting to some folks, but they have to kind of start somewhere, and they start where their investment is. And then I think they start to add things onto it and create a benchmark and measure from there. And hopefully it improves behavior and the relationships, and then it improves bottom line business. And I think, a lot of folks, they look at that whole block and it's really overwhelming, but they have to kind of start somewhere and go from that home base. And then eventually they link things together and they make sense of it for them. And they do it in a cost-efficient way, and hopefully one that what they put in for investment is exceeded by what they get out in understanding of their audiences and effectiveness to sell to them.
What are you finding in terms of location-based targeting for consumers? What are you finding? Are consumers liking that, not liking it?
Yeah, and it's interesting now because like this big monkey wrench of GDPR has come out over the last month or so, where people are kind of reconsidering what individual privacy means and what the ability to share data means and what give to get or an opt-in relationship means. I mean, I'm personally still, I know that I'm being monitored in so many different ways, but I still prefer to kind of regulate or have some kind of feeling of the illusion of control over that. So somebody sends something to me or offers something to me, when I respond to it and they don't know precisely who I am, I might use my first initials instead of my name so that I know, like in all of those sort of non-solicited reach outs, if I supplied something back in return and they didn't have everything on me that I already knew, they knew who I was from an identification standpoint, I'll put a few cues like that into it so that I know like a month later when something else I don't want that has nothing to do with that comes out and it says, "Hey, KM, how you doing?" And I'll be like, "Okay, I don't want you either." And so it's interesting. I mean, I think people like the convenience, but they also want to have this, and I'm kind of joking saying it's the illusion of control, but they at least want to have permission-based relationships and not simply be surveilled, whether it's in an online environment or whether it is in a location-based environment. So I think the same behavioral cues or kind of blockers prevail based on the individual. And it's interesting to hear what others might think about that as well.
And if you found that in-store or in-mall targeting of advertising messages or deals or sales, whatever, does that work in your view?
It can work, but I think it needs to be based on someone responding to the hook or the provocation. So I think it's very interesting, and you see a lot of agencies that are either doing digital extensions of an ad campaign, or they're sort of these kind of, I don't know, like retail activation based or street team based agencies that are now extending into things that are kiosk based, or that there's a physical activation or a pop-up that's in space. I think if someone approaches that kind of activation environment and opts into it, that they are likely to do something to act upon it. I think when it intrudes upon them is sort of like, I just got back from a Vegas trip, and it's like the hawker in the street who double taps his or her palm with a postcard and sticks it in your face. It's like, I say no, it's like, but if something's there and you approach it and you're intrigued by it and there's something human, there's something universal or appealing or aspirational about it, and you engage, and then you find that what it's offering is relevant to you from a business or economic standpoint, then, so be it. And you opted in at that point. And from that point forward, you're at least interested in what that's trying to sell you.
So that sounds like it's more consumer buying versus a company selling.
Well, let's hope that it's a mutually agreed upon relationship, that there are products and services out in the world that are meant to be targeted at certain individuals that have a propensity to buy them, and that those individuals agree to the communication and then agree to that buying relationship, even if it's early in the stage versus it's an impulse buy or it's something that is targeted at you. I don't know. I just personally find those relationships to be more effective when it's a courtship and it's not being batted over the head and and being sort of forced into yes or no. Do you want to buy this?
Yeah, where do you see virtual and augmented reality going these days?
Yeah, I think it's just as some of the other things I was mentioning earlier, finally reaching a prime time where the technology itself is not a blocker to innovation, and that the focus needs to be on what is being said and how it's being presented, and not that it's based on the technology alone. I still have individual clients that come to us as an agency. They just want the technology. They want to. What can we do to get someone to put some goggles on? It's like, and again, it's in order to do what for whom, and to really be able to think of it as a capability that has interest in the cultural dialogue right now. But if it doesn't say something well, or if it doesn't say something in a novel way, I mean, it's just like putting a full page display ad out. If it's crappy advertising, it's kind of not worth it, and if it's crappy AR, if it's something that you're standing in a physical environment and there's a virtual environment on a screen or overlaid data in your field of vision on a device, if it's not really providing any additional value and it's simply the use of technology, you probably shouldn't have gone there. And I think we're finally reaching the age where people are getting comfortable both as creators and consumers, that the dialogue that happens and the sort of genuine kind of holistic conversation that can happen through these technologies is going to be much more genuine, much more interesting, and then much more of an exchange and less of a picking up a piece of technology and looking at it and putting it down and saying, I don't know what that did for me.
For virtual reality, is lack of scale an issue for your clients?
Lack of scale in terms of technology throughput, or in terms of an individual can put it on and 10 other people are standing there and not being able to see it?
Yeah, more the latter.
Yeah, I think it is. And, every time that we pitch something that only has an individual user, or that has a small handful of users, I try to pitch something that includes multiple viewing monitors. The idea that, I remember, a story from CBIT in Hanover many years ago, where I was responsible for working on IBM, and I had a free couple hours for lunch, and I walked off, and I knew that there were consumer activations going on there, and I was kind of walking around the campus of Hanover Fair, and I heard this, like, it was like Fight Club, like the screaming coming from a distance, and I walked in, and it was two gamers in an Intel sponsored environment playing FIFA, EA Sports FIFA, and it was an amazing spectator sport. And just two little geeky guys up there, like, kicking butt against each other. It was like, Spain versus Portugal or something. And I thought about that. It's like, it's two guys on a box, but there were like 5,000 people gathered around in this huge environment watching a life-size screen as if they were watching their countries playing. And I have to think that, when you can only have that user experience limited to so many people at a time, how cool is it to be able to bring the spectacle of participation into those that are not just engaged with the gear, but are able to watch what's happening and to gather some human value off of that? And I always use that Intel example as a kind of threshold moment for the power of being able to display something that had participation. And you knew, like, all kinds of side bets were going on with the guys who were rooting for Spain to win. And I'm just like, groovy. That's great.
The great irony is it's the VR was not the point.
No, no. I mean, I guess the point of the activation was computing power and the ability to have graphics cards work to their optimal potential. But really, it was about the human experience of world football and the participation that when you get a few thousand people gathered in front of it, how that's a powerful cultural thing. And that's the kind of thing we should be thinking about. Not what we're trying to sell. That's at the level below the skin of discovery. But the skin of discovery, it puts skin in the game. It's what gets you to walk up to something. I think years ago we'd put up a sign that says, Watson APIs, and put 5 bullet points underneath it for IBM. And it's like, that's no good. We've got to demonstrate them. And we not only have to demonstrate them, let's do it with something that's interesting to you. Let's have a hotel concierge or help you through a large, 500,000 person environment that's going on for a month, like an expo or something like that, where millions of people will go through. If you can create something to help them navigate the world through a bot experience, and that happens to prove the value of those Watson APIs, that is so much more effective than putting a list of bullet points up. Why don't you start developing on this today? It's like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Great stuff. Thank you, Curt Miller, and thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things.
Thanks so much, Chuck.